An improvement we can make to have better type safety with environment variables is to use a configuration namespace. By using it, we can store the environment variables we want in a namespace, which is basically a properly typed object containing these variables. And then, when we want to actually use them, we then inject this namespace. So let's begin. In the database folder, I will create a new folder called config. In this folder, I will create the file database.config. And to create a configuration namespace, we need to have a default export and then call the register as function. The first parameter is an alias for the namespace. I'll use database. So now this configuration namespace can be accessed as database config. And the second one is an anonymous function that returns the object with the environment variables we want. As I just want the URL, I'll then copy this. And there we have it, our configuration namespace. We can then inject the namespace here in the configuration of this dynamic module, which is the type_rm module. As we are making this namespace available only here, then this process is called partial registration. The injection process of the namespace is very specific, so you can consider this as boilerplate. First, in the configuration of the type_rm module, I'll use the imports array and here call config module dot for feature and pass as argument the namespace, which is database config. And here I use another array, the inject array. To inject the database config key property. And also the factory will now have a parameter, which I'll call database configuration, which will be of type config type of database config. So after this process, the database configuration will then actually be the object with the typed environment variables. So I can now delete this and write database configuration, and then we can see the environment variable appearing here with code completion. And so, although this process is kind of verbose, we now have type safety for our environment variables. In the next lesson, we'll see an alternative that can be considered a bit less verbose than this. So then just commit the changes. Using configuration namespace and partial registration. So, see you at the next lesson.